Good morning. Good to see you guys. My name is Adam, and I'm the campus pastor here at our South Hills Corona campus. And so glad to have you here today, especially if you're new with us, if you are visiting, if somebody drugged you here because, not drugged you, no, that sounded really bad. Yeah, especially if somebody drugged you. We apologize. That we did not suggest that. We did not teach that to them. I don't know where they got it. Please tell someone close to you. But no, if someone drug you here, you got to enunciate. Because you were like, man, I want to see some cars. I would love to eat some popcorn. We're glad that you're here. We hope you have a great experience today. We hope you enjoy yourself. We hope you learn something that is useful and eye-opening and maybe something you just want to explore more or talk more about. But we're in this series that's going all October long, which is called Magic Words, and it's a part of something we call Family Month, which is something we do every single year. And actually, before I dive into the message today, I just want to mention we have some additional resources that we've created for you to take these conversations outside of Sunday. In fact, if you go to our website, which is southhills.org and /Corona is how you get to our campus page. You can actually download a resource right to your phone, which is a Family Month devotional. And so it actually mirrors the sort of the topics and the lessons we're talking about in this service and gives you something to read and think about and talk about as a family every single day. If that's something you want to do, you can grab those right there. Some of you who have been a part of our church for a while are like, we're used to getting these devotionals. Where are they? We still have them. We just decided to go paperless this year because my wife is really into plants. And so that is a conversation that is being had. And so you can grab it right here and download that. And I think it really will help you connect to your family as you just learn to sort of share and talk about things that are a little bit deeper than surface level, which is I think where a lot of us get hung up. So today we're going to dive a little bit deeper into this series we started last week, which was more of a setup about the idea of magic words, that our words are weighty, that they carry power with them. And in fact, certain words are more powerful than others. And we really want to use our words to shape the world to be a better place. And not just the world in general, but our specific worlds, right? Like our family, our relationships. And so this week we're going to go further down that path, and we're going to unpack really the first of three words we're going to talk about during this series, the first of which is please. And so if you're going to take notes today, which I encourage you to do, the title of my message is Demands and Doorways. Demands and Doorways. I had this really vivid memory of, it was one of the first dates I ever went on, and it was memorable, not because of the girl that I was with, which my wife is happy to hear, but like because of what happened on the date, which is that there was a guy whose, I guess his meal or something was messed up, and he totally freaked out. He had a complete meltdown. I don't know if you've ever seen this before, where you're at a restaurant and somebody just freaked out and threw like a toddler level fit, but they were like in their 30s or 40s. And if you've never seen it, just know it's mesmerizing, right? It is. You can't look away. You're trying not to stare at it. It was behind me, and I was like, why didn't I sit where she's sitting? I could have a view without having to crane my neck. But like, it was happening behind me. And at first, it sort of started like as a rumble where you could hear that this guy was like upset, and he was like saying stuff, and then he started to get louder and louder, and now like people, like it's starting to get more hushed, and people are looking. And then like, I noticed because there's a guy on the other side of her that was like stood up and was like looking, and I was like, maybe it's okay for me to turn and look because that guy's standing, so I feel like maybe it's okay, and I'm turning, and this guy, now he's standing up, he's yelling at the waiter, somebody else comes over, and this guy's yelling. I can't really make out what he's saying, but there's a lot of curse words, which you can look those up on Google. I'm not gonna say them, but and then like this was the way that he ended it, which was just miraculous to see, is he was talking something about how he like the food wasn't right or whatever, and he grabbed a handful of the food, and he was like talking out with his hand, and then he just spiked it on the ground. And I was like, whoa! And then he did it again. He took another handful, because in his mind, he was like, that was a good move. That was pretty good. And so he took another, and he just like spiked it on the ground, and then they escorted him out, and it totally ruined the date, but it made my night. I mean, it was amazing. And it's one of those things where it was so insane, it was so train wrecky, and like stuff like that. To me, depending on your personality, if you see something like this, it may bring out something different in you than it does me. For me, it just seems so funny because it just seems so like childish to me, and I just thought it was hilarious. The girl I was with, it seemed to scare her even more that I was laughing. And she's just like, what is going on right now? Am I dating the Joker? What's happening? And it was just, but like to me, it was crazy. It was such a crazy scene. And it was so evident that like something else was going on with this guy. But like when we see things like that, maybe for you, you think it's kind of funny. Maybe you're a little bit embarrassed for the person who it's happening for. Maybe it annoys you. Maybe it scares you a little bit. Probably the thing that it doesn't trigger for you, that bring up for you, is this feeling of like, you know what? That is how I want to be. You know what? That's how I want people to see me. Just as angry, arrogant, entitled. Oh man, that's how I want to be known, right? And probably not. That's probably not what came up in you. And in fact, when we see displays like this, especially when they're supersized, it is a massive like turnoff. It's just like there's something that is gross about that behavior that we don't want to have anything to do with. And we call sort of these groupings of behavior maybe like entitlement, or at least that's what they bridge from. And we throw that word around a lot in our culture, but maybe you've never really thought about what it means. When you see it, you know it, but you may not know how to define it. And so I want to just like define it for you this morning so that you can feel weird for the rest of the day, assuming like, oh my gosh, some of these traits look familiar, right? So I would say like 8 things that really stand out about entitlement. Entitled people tend to think that they are always right? That anyone who doesn't see things their way is a complete idiot, right? That the rules don't apply to them, that they shouldn't have to work that hard at things. Everybody else, but like, that's everybody else, you know? That like what they want ought to be your top priority. Not just their top priority. You need to drop what you're doing and help them with what they want done right now. They think that like saying thank you for what they already deserve is ridiculous, which of course is everything. And that others should live in awe of their unique brilliance because it's undeniable. They also think that the problems they face are pretty much everyone else's fault. Now, these are traits we see inside of entitled people or from entitled people. But I think if you were to distill it down into one simple definition, you could say that to be entitled is believing that you deserve better because you're special and you're due. You're special and you're due. Now, when you hear all this, there's probably a part of you that's just like, entitled people are the worst. And there's probably another part of you that's like, I think I might be one of them, right? Like there's something in you that's just like a little bit nervous. Like, man, there's some of those traits that maybe feel a little bit more familiar than I want to admit to other people. Like, what if we did this? What if we printed off like all of the traits that I listed earlier, and we gave like a worksheet to everyone in your family, and we put your name at the top. And we're just like, hey, just check all the boxes that maybe you see in this person, right? How many of those traits do you think they would identify as something that they see in you? Well, we've got those worksheets. Come on, guys. No, I'm just kidding. A lot of you are like, please don't do this. Please don't do this. I don't know. I have a feeling it's not going to be good. And the reason we don't like the thought of that is because we don't want to be this way, right? And I wouldn't recommend it. In fact, neither does the scripture. There's a scripture in the book of James, the brother of Jesus talking, and he's actually quoting something actually that is a long-standing proverb from the Old Testament. And he says this in James chapter 4, verse 6, God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. In other words, like if someone is prideful, God is not helping them. In fact, he may be sort of halting what they're doing. And it's crazy because a lot of prideful people are like, God is with me. And God is like, well, not you. I mean, you got some good ideas, but you're very prideful. But and oftentimes we see that maybe God is not with these people because when people are very entitled, their relationships tend to implode over time. Even if they get some success, their inner circles tend to self-destruct. But those who are truly submitted to God, this verse is telling us, become emotionally intelligent enough to navigate relationships gracefully. And maybe when you hear that, Some of you are like, I know. I know what you're going to say, and I get it. Like, I know I'm supposed to be pleasant and ignore my feelings and just go along with whatever and not assert myself or stick up for myself in any way and just say yes to everything and just serve all the time and never question anyone who's ever in charge or admit to being uncomfortable and never dream for myself, only for other people, because that in our minds is what we think a Christian is. But that's not humility. That's self-loathing. And I think this has gotten like carried away inside of Christian circles, that we think this is what it means to follow Jesus. We believe that being a Christian is being a doormat. But in reality, if you read through the stories of Jesus, Jesus wasn't always nice. He was considerate, but there's a big difference between the two. And I want to just draw some lines this morning. A demand puts me over you. Do what I say. This is what I want or else. A doormat puts you over me. Well, I guess I'll just lay down, let people walk all over me. But a Christ follower puts what's best for both of us over what's best for either of us. And this is why it's so difficult to lean into this. This is why it is a task that requires God to lead the way every step of the way. Because the truth is, God does not want you to live in denial of your needs. He wants you to ask for what it is you want and need. In fact, James says this a little bit earlier. James chapter 4, verse 2, he says, you don't have what you want because you don't ask for it. And even when you ask, you don't get it because your motives are wrong. And this verse confronts us on a couple different levels, right? It's saying that, there's some of us that have trouble asking for what we want because if we're honest, we don't know what it is. We've been living for other people for so long, we have no idea what we want. We have no idea what we could do if we had the opportunity to do anything. Someone's like, if you could do whatever you want, what would you do? And you're like, what would you say? Because you don't have any idea. And probably it's because you've been taught that thinking this way is selfish. Others of us have never really slowed down to ask if what we want is what God wants for us. We're like, God, I really want this. And he's like, okay, well, why do you want that? And you're like, I don't want to talk about it. Can you make that happen for me? That's really what I want. God, this is what you want. He's like, no, that was your idea, not my idea. And then there's others of us that we don't ask at all. We just make demands of God. God, this is what I need from you, and you owe it to me because I paid my tithes once in 1993, okay? And I'm not going to do it again until you catch up with some of the things I've been asking for. And this verse is saying, listen, no, ask, but understand whether you're asking God or you're asking other people, that how you ask is just as important as what you ask for. How you ask is just as important as what you ask for. And you already know this. There are certain things that if somebody, ask you in a certain way, you'd be like, I don't think so. But somebody else asks you in a different way, and you're like, okay. Because how you ask is just as important as what you ask for. And I want to show you what I mean by looking at this Old Testament story that I think is so fascinating on so many levels. It's in the book of Daniel, and it's about this guy named Daniel. And that's why they named it that. And it begins with the people of Israel. These are like God's people, the Jewish people, the Hebrew people. They are conquered by the Babylonians. And a lot of their people are captured, those that aren't killed in the war. And they are brought back to Babylon. And the king, actually, of this time was, even though in some ways he was kind of a bad guy, he was also a brilliant political strategist. And so what he did was he wanted to collect basically the best and the brightest of the peoples that he captured and leverage them to be advisors in his administration. But he had a specific list of things that he was looking for, guidelines, right? It says this in Daniel chapter 1, verse 4. This is the king's instructions on who to pick. Select only strong, healthy, good-looking men who are intelligent, wise, and well-suited to serve. And some of you single ladies are like, I am looking for the same thing. So you're trying to set me up, just copy and paste these guidelines from the book of Daniel, put that in a profile. Yes, please. Healthy, strong, good-looking men. Yes. Intelligent, wise, who are excited to serve me? Yes. I was really expecting more ladies to get excited, but that's fine. Some of you are like, we already posted that. They ain't out there. We're still looking. They're all trapped in Babylon, wherever that is. I can't find any of them. But Daniel, he fit this profile. That's why this story is about him. And he was invited to serve the king. And they moved him into the palace and they began to teach him Babylonian culture. It says in Daniel 1, verse 5, that the king assigned them rations of food and wine from his own kitchens as they trained for the next 3 years. But Daniel was determined not to defile himself by eating their food. Now, this sounds a little bit entitled, but only because maybe you don't understand the context, right? The Israelites, Daniel's people, had all of these restrictions, religious requirements related to food that Daniel still wanted to honor even though he was far from home. And these are outlined in the books of Leviticus and Deuteronomy. I'll just give you some highlights as just some examples. It was stuff like this. This is Leviticus chapter 11, verse 4. You may not eat the following animals: the hyrax, obviously, the hare, the pig. Don't even touch their dead bodies. In fact, if any of them fall into a clay pot, everything in it will be defiled, and you must smash the pot immediately. Very strict, right? Some of you are like, smash the pot immediately means something different now. We don't need to talk about that, you guys. This is Old Testament. It's talking about an actual device that would hold meats, okay? And Daniel and his people had always lived by these rules, but now he's a prisoner of war. And when you are a prisoner of war, nobody cares. Nobody cares what your traditions are. Nobody cares what rules you lived by. Their thought is just eat what they gave you. In fact, you got it good. Did you know that what you are eating right now is from the king's kitchen? You're welcome. You were lucky that you are not rotting in a prison right now, eating breadcrumbs that you're sharing with a giant rat that looks like a dog. Or a dog that looks like a rat. They could go either way. And that's true. If someone were to say that to Daniel, they're speaking the truth. And so Daniel is got this dilemma. He's wondering, how do I tell the king? King, I would rather not eat the bacon-wrapped hyrax skewers in the huckleberry hair sauce that you're serving everyone. Very kind of you, no disrespect, but it ain't on my plan, okay? I've got a very strict eating plan, and it doesn't include that. He doesn't want to come off prideful or entitled or insulting because he's really not a demanding person. He's a devoted person. And his devotion to his God require him to avoid certain things. But what if the king doesn't see it like that? What if the king just sees rudeness? How does he navigate this situation with humility and grace? Because he really only has 4 options. And they're the same 4 options we all have when we face dilemmas like this, right? He can comply, which is probably a thought he had, right? Do I ignore my conscience and just go along, just do what everybody else is doing? He can avoid, right? Do I just say nothing and then secretly do whatever I want anyway and just hope that they forget about the rule that they made? And some of you are like, you just described my teenage years, right? That is what I did a lot of. You can demand, right? Where you stand your ground and you make a scene and you insist that they do it your way, or you can request. And Daniel's probably wondering, is this what I do? Or do I humbly share my perspective and gracefully ask for what I want, knowing they could say no? And I bring this up because you have the same 4 options, right? And no matter what obstacles you face, and life throws so many surprises at all of us that throw us off course, that sort of create obstacles between us and what we want in life, where we're going in a certain direction and we think that things are going to happen in a certain way, and they don't, and we don't know what to do with that. What then? And this is an important question to ask yourself, because the truth is, and you're not going to want to hear this, how you react is who you are. How you react is who you are. A lot of times people say that actions speak louder than words, and that's true. But reactions speak louder than both. And I bring this up because I think there's probably a lot of us in here who have gotten pretty good at acting like a Christian, but you don't react like a Christian. You know how to act like a Christian, but you don't react in situations like Christ would if he were put in that same situation. If you have time to sort of measure it out and think about it and tiptoe your way through it in advance, you can control it. But if somebody pushes your buttons, what comes out of you is a lot more hell than heaven. You see, the reality of it is what spontaneously spills out of you says more about you than what you set out to do. And Jesus' goal is not just to save your soul, but to redeem your reactions. Because the truth is, the more your inner life revolves around Jesus, the more your impulses reflect his spirit. You know how to tell if somebody has a deep, meaningful relationship with Jesus? That when things don't go their way, their reactions look like Christ. Because that is not what is naturally in them. They have submitted themselves to something that's bigger than them. The New Testament authors called this phenomenon displaying the fruit of the Spirit. That what's growing out of your life looks like Christ and less like your dark human impulses. So in this story, it says in Daniel chapter 1, verse 8, that Daniel asked the chief of staff not to eat these unacceptable foods. And the chief of staff responded, I'm afraid that you will become pale, thin, and weak compared to the other advisors, and the king will have me beheaded. That's a significant fear, okay? These are real stakes, people. And some of you are like, that is why I don't like to ask for stuff, because that's what's going to happen. People are just going to say no. And then what? And this is a great question, right? Like, if we're going to be people who ask, if we're going to try and be people of please, what do you do with a no? And I would recommend that before you decide what to say to a no, you would be very smart to discern why they said no. And of course, you're like, well, I don't need to ask them. I already know why they said no. It's because they're a jerk, okay? Because they only care about themselves, because they're not looking out for me, because they don't care about me, because they don't support me. And that might be true. But you know why Daniel's attendant said no to him? He was afraid of being beheaded. That's a legitimate fear. I'm sure you might be going through stuff right now, and I'm sure what's on the line is not beheading. You're like, I'm really afraid. I don't really want to do this thing. What's going to happen? They're going to cut your head off? No, but they may really not like me over lunch. Could be awkward over the holidays. Beheading is kind of a big deal. And I think the thing that we see in this story is true of a lot of us. Often the reason someone says no to you has nothing to do with you. In fact, most people say no to protect themselves, not punish someone else. A lot of times we're like, they're out to get me. And it's like, probably not. They probably are thinking about things that have nothing to do with you that your ask may interfere with, and that makes them nervous. But oftentimes we don't see this because we're only thinking about us and what we're going through, which is why the Apostle Paul takes great effort to tell us this. This is Philippians chapter 2, verse 4. He says, don't look out only for your own interests, but take an interest in others too. And when we read this verse at face value, we're like, okay, I get it. Like, Paul is wanting us to care about someone other than ourselves. I understand. And he is saying that. But here's what I want to throw out. How often is, like, when we think about this verse, how often do we include the someone that is standing between us and what we want? Like, do you make it a habit in your life to look out for the interest of the person that is currently saying no to you? Some of you are like, no, I don't care about them. I need what I want. And I wonder that if you could see what they see, if you might do things differently. This is what Paul is trying to get us to do, because This is what grace does. He's pointing here to the power of please. And actually thinking about like the situation we're in, the dilemma, the conflict between us and what we want and someone else, actually thinking about it from their perspective and looking out for the peace that they are interested in or trying to protect is smart, because the opposite doesn't tend to work long term. The opposite of humility, right? A prideful response. I don't know if you've noticed this, but the more you nag someone, the more they tend to retreat. The more you push, the more they push back. The more you threaten someone, the more defensive they usually get. When you force them, they bitterly comply. And you're like, I did it. And usually at the same time, they are looking for ways to either get away or get you back. But please takes a posture that says, listen, if it's not good for you, it can't be what's best for me. If it's not good for you, it can't be what's best for me. Please puts others first by humbly asking instead of arrogantly assuming. Not just asking for what we want, but asking why they're answering the way they are. Instead of assuming that someone is dead set against us, instead of assuming we understand their motives and where they're coming from, ask. And this is why Daniel leads with please. In verse 12, Daniel responds to the no by saying this, okay, please test us Hebrews for 10 days on a diet of vegetables and water. Let's see how we look compared to the others eating the king's food, and then make your decision. Your decision. Notice Daniel doesn't try and get this guy to agree with him, which is typically what we do. He tries to get him to run an experiment. Daniel's like, I get that you have a different perspective than me, and it's based on some fears that you have, and I totally understand that. That's valid. So don't agree with me. I could be wrong, actually. Instead, why don't you run an experiment, right? Why don't we test this information, and then you can draw your own conclusion based on what you see. And I'll respect that decision. I wonder, like, in your life, in your everyday relationships, maybe you do this with your company or your workplace, but how often do you do this with your family and your close relationships? How often do you run experiments? Right? When was the last time you hit a wall with something and your please response was essentially, listen, can we agree to just try this thing this way for this amount of time and see if it gets us both closer to our goals? That's an experiment. And that is verbatim what Daniel is doing here. Listen, I get that you don't want to do this. What if we agree just to try this thing? Just try it. We're not committing forever. This way for this amount of time, and then we'll observe it. We'll both observe what is working. We both know what we're trying to get out of this thing and see if it gets us both closer to our goals. And maybe it does and maybe it doesn't. But I will tell you this, whatever the experiment is, it requires us to be specific. And this is why they're so healthy in our interpersonal relationships. Maybe this is actually what's missing for you. That you have a difficult time being specific when you ask. Maybe you're like, I ask all the time. People just don't listen, and that might be true. But is it possible that when you ask in a way that is so vague, the other person has no idea what you're actually asking for? Because in your mind, it's so clear to you, but it's so fuzzy to them. And you know why? Because they don't live in your head. But you do. So it seems pretty self-explanatory to you, but they don't get it. You're like, can we spend more time together? And you know exactly what that means to you. They don't. Please don't talk down to me. I'd really like it if we ate healthier. Could you just be a little nicer? And here's the problem. What do nicer and healthier mean? A lot of times we throw out these terms and we understand our definition, but it's possible that you're dealing with a definition that is way different than theirs. I got to tell you, this is one of the first things I learned in marriage. My definition of should we eat a little bit healthier is different than my wife's. I was like, I had one stalk of broccoli with cheese on it. Like, I'm being healthy. And she's like, no, it's just where we just eat vegetables, but with no dressing. And I was like, that's crazy people talk right there. I don't even know what you're talking. That's not a little bit healthy. That's like, I'm trying to be a robot or fight cancer. I'm not trying to do that. She's like, it's never too early to start. I'm like, it feels like it for me. We have different definitions. And this leads to a lot of conflict in our lives because even if the other person tries to do what they think it is we just asked them for, they're just going to be able to deliver their version of that thing, which is not at all what you were thinking but couldn't communicate. And when they do it, you are angry because they didn't do what you actually wanted them to do that you felt like you asked for, but they didn't fully understand. And then you're angry and they're very confused. Some of you are like, you just described my entire marriage. All three of them. That is what happened. Because this is what happens to all of us over and over again. But even if you did ask the right way, like let's say that you could master this, right? And you proposed the perfect experiment, why would they listen to you? Because that's probably your pushback. Like, they're not even gonna listen to me. Why would this guy in this story listen to Daniel? Because he has all the power. Daniel has no power. Daniel is essentially an elevated slave who just happens to be smart. This is what it says. If we rewind to verse 9, it says, God had given the chief of staff both respect and affection for Daniel. In other words, the reason why he listened to his experiment was because he liked him and he respected him, which means this wasn't the first time that Daniel spent time with this guy. There's a relationship that exists there. They'd spent time around each other. And what this guy had observed about Daniel is that he's honest and trustworthy, and he treats people honorably, and he's empathetic, and he's confident, and he's kind. And even when he got bad news, he somehow still managed, even in his grief, to be positive. What is not to like about that? And because Daniel was this way, this guy listens to him. Because when someone who fits this description of being likable and respectable asks you for something, you listen. And you're not going to want to hear this, but like if no one is listening to you, maybe it's time to ask yourself, could this have anything to do with you? Do others find you likable and respectable? And if not, what are you going to do about that? Like, when was the last time you asked the people around you, what can I do to grow your respect and affection for me? What can I do to grow your respect and affection for me? What if you asked this to your family, to the person you're dating, to your spouse? Hopefully the same person. To your kids, to your parents, to the people that you work for or who work for you. I wonder how it would change and shift the relationship. I wonder what they would say. Because the attendant had so much affection and respect for Daniel, he listens to him. It says this, verse 14, that Daniel's attendant agreed to test him, and after 10 days, he looked healthier and stronger than the advisors who ate the king's menu. And from then on, the attendant fed them vegetables instead of the king's food. Now, this is the best case scenario, right? In a situation like this. Daniel gets a better meal plan, the one that he wanted. The king gets really healthy advisors. The attendant gets to keep his head. It's a win-win-win, right? Everybody is getting something good out of it. But I think the real victory here, the real win, is that not that Daniel passed the test, but that he had enough emotional intelligence to propose the test. I think the victory in this story isn't the outcome, but it's actually the responses in the middle of the situation. It's the fact that Daniel kept calm and related with grace and held a posture of please and never once compromised his character to get what he wanted or accomplish his goals. And notice here what he is actually after. If you go back and read through this story, it's the ability to do what actually is going to work for him, not to require everyone else to do what works for him. And this is where we get in trouble, I think, a lot of times, especially in the church. We assume, like, listen, if everyone doesn't do what God told me to do, then they're all doing it wrong, and they are the worst. But God designs with diversity in mind. He didn't create us all with the same personalities and deficiencies and callings. And what we see in this story that's so powerful is that Daniel's desire was to win those around him by demonstrating his devotion, not demanding their participation. I want you to hear me this morning. Christianity has always been about modeling, not mandating. It advances through sacrificial demonstration, not aggressive legislation. And it has always been this way. And we strive to live this way in our lives because this is how Jesus lived his life. Listen to this description of Jesus from the book of Revelation, of all places. Some of you are like, he finally got to it. Here we go. Revelation chapter 3, verse 20. This is God speaking about himself. I stand at the door and knock. If you open the door, I will come in and we will share a meal as friends. Is this not the scary revelation Jesus you were expecting? This is kind of like soft knocking supper Jesus, right? This is a different one. And isn't it interesting that Jesus, who knows everything, including what is best for all of us, doesn't kick down the door of our lives and shout demands. He doesn't angrily insist we blindly behave whatever he says. He stands at the door of our heart and he gently knocks. Like Daniel, he invites us to watch him, to see that he is respectable and likable and that he has life-giving insight. And then he says, listen, I'm not going to barge in, but I feel like what I have for you, the relationship I want with you, and the path I've carved out for you will actually lead to everything that you are deeply desperate for. Everything that will fulfill you is found on the other side of you opening the door of your life and inviting me in. But I will not go where I'm not wanted. And this is what I want you to see here, that even God assumes a posture of please. And so should you. I think we have this image of God, that God is demanding, that God is steamrolling, but the best picture of God is in Jesus. And Jesus says, please. Jesus is calm. Jesus is caring. Jesus is considerate. Here's my challenge to you this week. As you take this home and try and apply this to your life, this is your homework, if you will, is to ask your family this simple question, like, where would they like you to make more requests instead of demands? Where would you like me to make more requests instead of demands? I wonder what they would say. I wonder if they would identify something as a demand that you thought was a request. And they were like, not the way you say it. I wonder how this might change your dynamic. You could flip this question too. We don't have a slide for it, but doesn't mean you can't write it down. You could ask them, like, what requests are you making that you think I'm ignoring? I wonder what would happen if you began to think about the situation that you're in from both of your perspectives, and instead of being someone who is demanding, and instead of feeling like the only other option is being a doormat, if you determine to be a Christ follower who elevated what is best for both of you over what is good for either of you. If you approach your family, your closest relationships, and maybe even your boss or the people who frustrate you most by saying, like, listen, if it isn't good for you, it can't be what's best for me. Let's work on a better experiment here. Let's design something better. I'm going to keep asking for what's best because I'm a person of please. And if you don't want to say yes because you don't think I'm likable, You don't think I'm respectable? Tell me how I can improve. Because I want to be someone who is worth watching and whose example is worth following, not someone that you want to bow to because I have steamrolled you with my demands and my arguments and you feel like you have to comply. I want to be somebody like Jesus who just stands at the door and faithfully knocks. And I'm going to pray this into your life today, that God would give you the ability to live this way, because you can only do it with God's help. You can only treat other people like God treats you if you lean into and embrace how God treats you. And I want to pray that you would have the ability to do that beginning this week. Would you bow your heads across this room with me? God, we are so grateful for who you are, for how you made us. We're grateful that you didn't just give us life, but you actively show us the best way to live. Through your word, through your way, through your spirit that guides us from the inside. And God, I just pray that we would slow down, that we would listen to you. And God, that we would be people that become so in tune with who you are by connecting to your son, Jesus, that we begin to react like you. Little by little, that like the more our interior life revolves around who you are and what you say, the things that you did, as opposed to what we saw in the news or something we're nervous about or something somebody said to us in the third grade. God, the more our inner life begins to revolve around you, may the more interactions and conversations we have reflect you. When we're with people, may they feel like we are someone who enters a situation like Jesus. May we be people of please, people who consider the perspectives, who think about what other people are going through, and who propose experiments to see everyone honored. Help us to be the best version of ourselves, a version we cannot be on our own, as we step by step follow you. It's in Jesus' name we pray. And everybody said, amen, amen.